In this episode of Ricky Remembers Arcades. Ricky remembers arcades. Now, I know there were a lot of arcades in the city back then, but I'm going to talk about three particular arcades in one particular mall in Metro Manila back in the early 90s. I'm talking about Robinson's Galleria, the mall, and I'm talking about Renos, Glicos, and Galaxy. So in Robinson's Galleria back in the day, there were three arcades. The first one was in the basement. It was in the lower floor or in the lower floors. It was called Glicos. Glicos. So I remember with Glicos in the opening or in the entrance rather, in the entrance there was that that punching bag thing where you punch it and it gives you a score, right? That was like one of the highlights in Glicos there at the lower ground floor of Robinson's Galleria. So that was one. Now, right in front of Glicos, or right in front of the entrance of Glicos also, there's an escalator. So when you go up the escalator, you go to the first floor, and that's right away you will find Renos. Renos was the main arcade that my friends and I would play in. I don't know, because it felt like it was the coolest arcade. It was the most accessible. The most kids played there in Renos. It was darker. The lighting was better. If you go to Glicos, it's a different level of players that you will encounter there. And Glicos is brighter. Maybe it's a little more kid-friendly because it's brighter. They had those basketball or those hoops that you shoot basketballs in. So it was a little bit more for kids, but they still had some Street Fighter arcade games in there. So you could go there if Renos was crowded or if Galaxy was crowded. So on the first floor you had Renos. It was darker, the lighting was better. Renos is actually split into two in the two corners in the first or in the ground floor of Robinson's Galleria. So you can go to one corner and then you can cross the alleyway or the corridor of the corridor of Galleria, and there was another one in the next corner. So most of us would congregate in Renos rather than in Glicos. If the arcade games or Street Fighter 2 was full, we would go down to Glicos and play there as well. So in Renos, what we would usually play back then was Street Fighter 2, but then also right around that time, Super Street Fighter came out, and that's where they had those new characters. I remember Fei Long was there, and I was a Fei Long guy. I used Fei Long all the time in Super Street Fighter. So Fei Long was like a Bruce Lee character, and another new character was Cammy. Cammy was like a Russian. She's female, so she's like the other Chun-Li, but she's wearing this beret and these green leotards, and apparently she's Russian. So Cammy was the other new girl, and then there was DJ, who was the Jamaican character, and I think, or if I remember this correctly, he was known for his capoeira moves. And then, guys, please remind me here, was there another character, a new character who was Native American or who was Indian? I'm not quite sure if there was one Native American or Indian character in there, but I do remember Cammy, Fei Long, and DJ in Super Street Fighter, and that's what we would play. And now, so they were really just close to each other. You go down the escalator, or you go up the escalator, you're in Renos, or go down the escalator, and you're in Glicos. Now, on almost, I would say, the other end of Robinson's Galleria, and on the top floor, on the third floor, in the corner there of the third floor, was Galaxy. So Galaxy was another arcade, but it was on the top floor. It was like a combination of both Glicos and Renos, because it was bigger, because Glicos is bigger, but it also had the better light. So it was dark with better lighting. So sometimes we would end up in Galaxy as well, because Renos and Glicos would both get crowded, and Galaxy was our last resort, or was our other choice. because it was farther, so it was we were just lazy to go up another couple of floors to go up to the top. But there was Galaxy in that corner. It was right across Paeng's Sky Bowl, which was the bowling alley or the bowling place in Robinson's Galleria. So sometimes we would go to Paeng's Sky Bowl and play bowling, or sometimes we would just end up playing Street Fighter 2 or Super Street Fighter in Galaxy. Now, the one thing I remember also with playing in those arcade games back in the day, there was etiquette. There was like arcade games etiquette, or there was Street Fighter etiquette, where if you were gonna play against somebody, let's just say it wasn't your friend, it was just a stranger who wanted to challenge you on Street Fighter or Super Street Fighter. If your opponent wins or if you win, you gotta give them a mercy round. So the second round would be you kind of let them win or something like that. Or you wait until they even up the score so that there would be a third game so that you make the most of your tokens, right? So it's best of 3, so it's not like you win and then on the second game you just win again, right? So you give them a chance, and then on the third game, that's the deciding factor on who wins or not. So there was a mercy round where you sort of let the other guy win or the other player win. But if, sometimes you can't control these things and your character gets out of control and then just go ahead and win, right? So there was such a thing as arcade game or I don't know if this was just for Street Fighter and Tekken, but back then there was etiquette where it was a mercy round where you let the other guy win on the second game. And then if I remember this correctly also, there were certain moves that maybe you had to control because it was a little unfair, like certain throws or certain combination moves you weren't supposed to do because it was just unfair and you would win easily right away within Street Fighter. So I remember also, aside from Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter, there was a new game that came out called Night Stalkers. I don't know if it was Night Stalkers or Dark Stalkers, but it was basically the same mechanics where it was Street Fighter. It was a fighting game, but the characters were supernatural characters or from Gothic stories like Dracula. I remember there was a Dracula or a vampire character. Of course, there's a Wolfman. I remember his name was John Talbane. Frenchie Dalumpines. Remember our favorite character then in Night Stalkers or Dark Stalkers was John Talbane. So he was this character who turned into a werewolf. And then there was like a merman or a mermaid character there as well. So it was the same. I think it was also by Capcom, where it was essentially Street Fighter with better graphics and better actions and better combos, but it was with supernatural characters. So that came out right in the early to mid 90s as well, 93, 94, when Night Stalkers came out. So we would either play Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter, or Night Stalkers. There was also, I think this was right around the time that Marvel vs. Capcom came out as well. That was an interesting game as well, where you could play using Wolverine or Spider-Man and Captain America and fight against Ken and Ryu and Guile and Chun-Li. And then also, this was a little earlier, but I remember that game, Operation Wolf. I don't know if anybody else remembers that game. It was a shoot 'em up game. It was like Rambo, military themed game, but all the arcades had that as well. Operation Wolf, and that was the opening theme, and it was very popular back then as well. So we had Operation Wolf, we had Street Fighter, and then we had Super Street Fighter, and then we also had Night Stalkers. So yeah, weekends would be spent in Robinson's Galleria, shuttling between Glicos, Renos, and Galaxy, and sometimes Paeng Sky Bowl. So those were the 3 arcades that we remember from our late high school days to our early college days. So we would hang out there all of Saturday. I remember we would be there Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then for lunch we would go to Yoshinoya. We would go to Yoshinoya in the same floor where Glicos is, or no, in the same floor where Renos is, and we would have lunch there in Yoshinoya, no fail. And up to now, up to now, Yoshinoya is one of my favorites because of those times when we would eat there all the time. And also, I think more importantly, the reason why we hung out there was because Robinson's Galleria was right beside Poveda. Poveda is an all-girls Catholic school, and we would hang around there in the arcades so that we could meet up with some of our Poveda friends. And I don't know if that was the main reason that we were there. For some it was, for the others it wasn't. They were really there just to play Street Fighter. But for some of our friends, it was also so that they could meet up with our friends from Poveda and talk about the next party that we were gonna go to or the next soiree that we were gonna have. So yeah, there was a huge possibility that you would bump into Povedans, as they were called, if you hung out in Robinson's Galleria in those arcades. So that's your episode for today. Ricky remembers arcades. Ricky remembers Renos, Glicos, and Galaxy in Robinson's Galleria. Thank you. Oh, by the way, we have a milestone. We hit 100 subscribers from our last episode. So we're now at 105 subscribers. So goal number 1 has been unlocked. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed and who has been or who have been watching and liking and commenting in the show. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Our next goal is 500 subscribers. I hope we make it soon. And this has been Ricky Remembers. Thank you once again. Don't forget to drop your comments, like the video, share the video, and more importantly, subscribe to the video. Thank you, and tune in again next time for another episode of Ricky Remembers. Thank you.